We continue our journey through 2 Chronicles today with chapters 21 and 22. And as yesterday, as King Jehoshaphat had joined with the King Aram of the northern kingdom, he had come into God's disfavor a little bit. And the end of chapter 20, much of what Jehoshaphat had done was destroyed, the ships and everything. And then today, chapter 21 begins with Jehoshaphat's death. And he's sleeping with his ancestors and buried with his ancestors in the city of David. His son Jehoram begins to be king, or takes control after that, and Jehoram begins his reign with doing evil. He puts all of his brothers to the sword. He kills all of his brothers, anyone who may challenge him for the throne. And this, sad to say, this was one of the common things that happened. We see it, often as we read through these histories of the kings and everything. But he, in the lists, the chronicler lists Jehoram's brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat. And it says their father gave them many gifts, silver, gold, valuable possessions. And so he had treated them well. And Jehoram, it says, was 32 when he began his reign. And his father Jehoshaphat, had reigned for quite a few years, 30 some years before that and everything. But the kingdom of Judah had begun its downfall with Jehoshaphat allying himself that way. And we find out that Jehoram, the new king, is married to King Ahab's daughter, the king of the northern kingdom, who had, invited King Jehoshaphat to come with him and join in the battle. And Jehoshaphat had started to fall out of God's favor, as had Judah, the southern kingdom. And while Jehoshaphat had been faithful, a good leader for the most of the time, had destroyed many of the places of worship in the high places, well, Jehoram rebuilt some of those. And in the days of his being king, Edom and Libnah revolted against this king of Judah because he was not faithful to God. And so here, there were parts of his kingdom that said, hey, you're not remaining faithful to God, and we want to. And so they had revolted because of their religious beliefs in God. And I think that's commendable that way. And it's right after that then in verse 11 that it tells us that Jehoram had remade the high places. And we think about that, his wife was the daughter of King Ahab, who did evil in the sight of the Lord. And wonder how much influence did she have in some of this as well. And as all of this was going on, verse 12, a letter came from Elijah. And, we heard of Elijah, as we were reading through the books of Kings too, and not a lot, but a little bit. And we know, of course, that there is quite a bit about Elijah, that we haven't heard and read, but we have read about Elijah in the past as well, but we don't read a lot about him, right here. But the letter says, "Thus says the Lord to God, because you have not walked in the ways of your father, but have walked in the way of the king of Israel and led Judah astray, and because you have killed your brothers, because you've done all of this evil, your reign isn't going to be long. There will be a great plague upon your people, and you will get a disease of the bowels that will lead to your death." And all of this comes to be. Excuse me. And he died in great agony. And then I think this is an important thing to look at in verse 20. He was 32 when he reigned. He reigned 8 years. He departed with no one's regret and was buried in the city of David, but not in the tomb of the kings. So where we have read many times that he slept with his fathers or with his ancestors, that would be in the tombs of the kings, here Jehoram is not buried with his ancestors. He's buried in the city of David, but we don't read that he slept with his ancestors. And I think it's a way of showing that the people also understood that, this man hadn't followed God. And, it says then the youngest, or the inhabitants of Jerusalem made his youngest, Ahaziah, as king and his successor. And for the troops who had come with Ahab had killed all of the older sons, And again, this is just more of the intrigue that's going on and of the protection, of self, of not having anyone to challenge that authority. But Ahaziah began his reign of Judah. It says he was, here in verse 4, it says he was 42 when he began his reign. Well, it's much more believed he was 22 because of, how old Jehoram was. I mean, he couldn't be 42. I mean, and so it's somebody copied or wrote something wrongly there and there. And even to think of him being as 22 is a little bit of a stretch, of all of the numbers that way. But again, the numbers aren't particular. What is important is that he was raised up as king by the people. And he reigned, he walked in the, it tells us, his mother's name was Athaliah, daughter of Omri, and he walked in the ways of the house of Ahab. Again, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And after his death, and he followed the advice of his father's advisors, who just kept advising to do evil in the sight of the Lord and to do the wrong things and to go to join with King Ahab and make war against another king. And this young king then finds himself injured in that battle. In verse 7, it was ordained by God that the downfall of Ahaziah would come about through his going to, and so we're seeing, the writer of this book, the chronicler, or, the author, is seeing God's work, or God's hand at work in much of this, And he came home injured, went to try to seek healing, but died because of his injuries that way. But he was after he died, then his mother sought about to destroy the rest of the royal family, and she leads Israel then for the next several years, 8 years I think it is. But so we have we read a lot about the kings, but in between the kings sometimes there seems to be breaks, and here is one of those breaks that's defined that Azariah's mother, I can't think of her name right, but anyway, she begins to reign, but the nursemaid of one of the sons, Jehoshabeath, takes Joash, this young son of Azariah, and hides him away and keeps him hidden for 6 years, while this Athaliah, Azariah's mother, I mean, keep all these names straight is just ridiculously hard for me. But so the queen mother, or whatever you want to call her, Athaliah, reigned over the land, and we don't hear, we're not told an awful lot about that, and we're at the end of chapter 22 today. But it's just the ongoing saga of how I think the thirst for power corrupts so many, and when you have, like Ahab was not following God, the king of the northern Israel, the northern kingdom, and the influence of that upon the southern kingdom, we saw it begin with Jehoshaphat, being encouraged to come into battle, join forces, and that was we heard. But why would you join forces with those who are doing evil? And we're just starting to see that downfall of the house of Judah, of the nation of Judah, and how they just how the leaders, the kings, the queens, the important people that others are looking up to. I mean, we had these two, Edom and Libnah, rebel because the king was doing evil in the sight of the Lord. But in time, they kind of forget. And it's one of those things with our history as well, that if we forget why there was a revolt against England back in the 1700s, 1770s, and the battle for the freedom and for our freedoms, and if we forget to teach our children and our grandchildren what our country is based upon, and let other things come into being, I mean, the fall of our nation could happen just like the fall of Judah, but to remind us and to teach us and to teach those upcoming of the importance of following God, of being true in so many different ways that way. And I can see I probably used a little more time again today, but I guess I like to talk too much. That's what my wife says. Anyway, may God bless you richly again today.